Hey guys, today we're going to be testing the Intel Arc B580 at 21 by 9 1440p ultra-wide. That's 3440 by 1440. We have the limited edition Intel card. This card has 12 gigabytes of VRAM at GDDR6. It's a $250 card, which is really interesting. We'll talk about it in a second. And it just came out last December. You can see our RAM and CPU combo here. We should not be bottlenecked whatsoever by our CPU. Very strong combination here. Now, the competitors that are kind of in this 250 price range are pretty scarce. And if you look, the ones that are most directly competing with it are typically 8 gigabyte cards. So we're going to run some recommended settings here, 21 by 9, some more modern games, some popular games, some older games. Good mix of everything, and just kind of see at what settings we can kind of, use the card to the best of its ability. Figured I would start with something I'm pretty confident that the game can perform well in. We're going to be on the medium preset setting, which has some anti-aliasing, not a lot, FSR quality. And I will say, I have already noticed after just a quick run on this game, the main thing that I noticed is just these 1% lows not holding super well. You see we're getting down to the 50s on the 1% lows, but still the game looks good. It's populating the screen well. It is a high refresh rate experience despite the 1% lows. It doesn't feel super stuttery or anything like that. The frame times just have peaks here and there. Typically, source engine, not really super surprising. It's relatively flat. But yeah, I mean, you can definitely play this game on much older hardware, so it shouldn't be super surprising that, with a modern CPU and even a budget modern GPU that you can really have a pretty solid experience here. Now, as you can see, those 1% lows are not really changing. For whatever reason, I don't know if it is a driver issue with Intel or just an issue with my CPU. I'm not 100% sure what it is, but I've tried a lot of different things. I've tried capping frame rate. I don't know why the 1% lows are staying here, but I will say, and this is coming from someone who's not a huge Counter-Strike person, so take it with a grain of salt, but it's not really affecting my experience that much. It doesn't feel like it's really affecting my ability to, kind of play the game competitively. Not that I really have ever played the game competitively. As you can see here, I'm definitely not the best at this game, but yeah, if you're looking for a cheap card to run at 21 by 9, certainly look no further. You can definitely do that with the B580. All right, next game here, a little bit newer of a title, Marvel Rivals. We are playing at the medium preset, and the two settings that have changed are just high for model detail and high for texture detail. We also have Intel's super sampling set to performance. Alright, so loading in here, we'll go ahead and start counting. I will say, this is an Unreal Engine 5 game. This kind of sits in between where you want the game to look good, but you primarily want it to run good. So that's the main reason for, utilizing this little bit more aggressive upscaling with performance as opposed to quality or trying to play it native. It's also an Unreal Engine 5 game, so it's not super well optimized for what you're getting, especially when you compare it to, its direct competition in a game like Overwatch. Certainly is, slightly less performant. This is a game that I've been playing myself a lot lately, and I have noticed that the FPS does vary pretty wildly. You'll get plus or minus, sometimes like plus or minus 10 FPS depending on the map that you're on. So map like this, that's more enclosed, indoors, we're averaging 103. That might be closer to 95, something like that on a different map. This is probably on the higher end, but yeah, the super sampling looks good, the upscaling looks good, sharp image, high refresh rate while still kind of looking pretty good. Our VRAM utilization, you see, once again, is just right about at that 8 mark, so seems like a common theme, not really straying too far off of that. But yeah, 104 average here, definitely a playable experience. As someone who has played a ton of this game, I wouldn't mind playing this way really at all. So yeah, pretty happy with the performance at our resolution here. Pretty nice. Next up here is Call of Duty Black Ops 6. We're going to be playing at the basic preset, Intel super sampling set to balanced, and I am going to come in here and with texture resolution, this is a pretty noticeable difference, so I actually am going to bump this all the way up to high and leave everything else default. Alright, so we're here loaded in. You can see pretty solid frame rate. You know, say what you will about Call of Duty, and many people have, and it's not my preferred game all the time, but they're generally pretty well optimized titles, and it's really no different with this one. Seems to be performing very well. You see right off the bat, 120 FPS average. That extra VRAM, if you can see our utilization there, is definitely coming into play. So you can see we're all the way up in that 11 gigabyte territory, so definitely those a little extra bit of VRAM there not going unused, which is very nice. Chase that guy down a little too far. So I know, you know, a lot of people build systems like this to play some competitive shooters like, you know, Call of Duty or Counter-Strike, stuff like that. So if you're looking for a card that can do that and then do a little bit more in some more intensive single-player titles with that extra VRAM, the B580 seems to be a pretty solid option. And as far as the picture quality goes with this, you know, the upscaling and the super sampling, my opinion, looks really good. Looks pretty sharp. It doesn't quite look native. I still do think that in general DLSS has the edge over XeSS, but it's not as big of a difference as, you know, some older generations of FSR compared to DLSS. So it is kind of making up some ground. Definitely a playable experience, and yeah, it feels responsive, feels snappy. You know, the input latency isn't bad at all. Our 1% lows are a little lower than I would like, but it's still, you know, it's not a super noticeable, negative. It still seems, you know, rather smooth experience. So yeah, definitely pretty happy here. Wouldn't mind playing on these settings on this hardware whatsoever. Alright, next up is Monster Hunter Wilds, which I'm going to spend a little more time on. It's kind of an interesting one. So you can see we are set to 21:9, so these gray bars you're seeing on the side of the screen is just, it's not a capture bug. This is how the game looks. It supports ultrawide according to the menu settings, but doesn't actually fill the horizontal resolution. So something to keep in mind there. We are on the medium texture setting or a graphic setting with some things adjusted. So in order to turn on frame generation, which we desperately need, we do have to use FSR. We're on ultra performance FSR to get us even, you know, a remotely stable frame rate. Ray tracing off, and then texture quality. This is a big one. This is a huge hit to the game. So although it shows us it's having a lot more VRAM available, you'll see that that's not necessarily true. And as soon as we turn this up into high, we are right up against our VRAM limit. These are the rest of the settings here, and we're going to go ahead and start counting. So as you can see, we do not nearly have that much VRAM available. If we were to go into the high settings, we would be way beyond our threshold, and that would become our bottleneck. Now, much like Spider-Man, although with frame generation we're getting 70s, typically that would not be a great experience. In a game like this where, yeah, you don't have to, you know, time some counters, things like that, it's not really like super pinpoint. The input latency, in my opinion, is worth the added bit of smoothness. The other thing to note for the frame generation, if you look at the sides of the screen, you see that little black line on each side of the screen. It's kind of hard to tell, but there's a little bit of weirdness. It almost looks like a hair or something on the side of the screen. That's another, you know, just a kind of quirk of the frame generation. So you can see we're getting around 70, 80s at times. This one is in water, which is not going to help us a ton. But this is a, you know, a pretty representative, you know, of what you're going to get. So I will say, you know, this is a game that is not well optimized and doesn't really make the card look great, but this is the reality of being a PC gamer in 2025. If you are wanting to play newer titles, you are going to have some games come out like Monster Hunter that are just not well optimized at launch. And, you know, could it potentially get better over time? You know, most likely it will. You know, I'd be confident that it will, but as of right now, you know, a game like Monster Hunter is definitely one of those games that comes out and you kind of want to play with your friends. So, can you play it at this resolution on a card like this? You can. You're just going to have to make some concessions. So those concessions here are primarily just visual quality. The FSR does not look great, I will say. You know, there are definitely parts of the game that, you know, the foliage, the finer details, they look really muddy. The texture quality, pretty much any texture quality other than the HD resolution pack, in my opinion, looks like pretty terrible. But that's kind of what you're going to have to settle for if you want, you know, a higher frame rate. So while it's not a good look for the card, it is a reality for, you know, PC gaming today. You can kind of brute force through some of these issues on higher end hardware. However, a lot of these issues persist even on higher end hardware. My personal rig that I play on primarily is a 4090, and while it runs the game, of course, much better than this, it does still have, you know, plenty of issues of its own. So it's just something you kind of have to keep in mind. Shove me into this hole here. So you can see 70 FPS average. The game looks, it's not a great experience as far as the visuals, but it's not unplayable. You can play it. You're just going to have to make some compromises, which is not the best, but it is actually, in my opinion, one of the best things about PC gaming is that you can kind of, you know, mix and match what settings are important to you, and you can typically find, you know, some middle ground where you are getting the performance and, for the most part, the visuals that you want. And on a game like this, you'll have to make more compromises than on some other better optimized games. But typically, as long as you have a modern GPU that has some of these technologies, you can have a really great experience. So 73 FPS average. That will also, you know, that will vary depending on different areas that you're at, the monsters that you're fighting, how many characters are on screen. I would say right now this is probably on the higher end of what you're going to be getting. But you know, it definitely does leave a little bit to be desired. So playable, just not really ideal. All right, we're here in Cyberpunk 2077, and this is an interesting one. So if we look at our settings here, if we just go ahead and place them on high, which I'm going to say right up front, this is what I recommend. High, quality upscaling, frame generation off. Ray tracing off. The only thing I'm going to adjust here is motion blur. And you can see really, really solid FPS, 90 FPS, and this pretty much, you know, in the high 70s to 90s, this pretty much remains true regardless of, you know, what you're doing, whether there's combat, and I have tested this pretty thoroughly. Game looks great. Picture quality is phenomenal on quality. It looks essentially native. Quality upscaling looks really great. This game has gone from being one of the most poorly optimized games to one of the most well optimized games in a pretty short period of time. You can see even the reflections, ray tracing is off, but if you look on the ground there, there's still like pretty impressive baked-in lighting work going on. Now, I say this is interesting because I do want to just show something. And the only reason I'm showing this isn't going to look good for the card, but the card was advertised as having ray tracing support, so I am going to go ahead and just turn on a few ray tracing settings real quick. Now, for ray tracing, the effect here, you know, as far as Ultra Psycho, between medium and ultra doesn't make a huge difference. I'm just going to leave it on medium for now, but you'll see that if we put it here, the lighting does look better. However, there is a significant performance hit. So you can see we're pretty much holding, you know, tight right around 40s, 45. And you can play like this. You know, of course, it was released on consoles in much worse shape than this. And it does look good. But when you compare it to what we were seeing before, it's not a huge seismic shift. Ray tracing in this game is super impressive. However, in order to really see, you know, the real nice version of it, you're gonna have to turn on path tracing, and when we do that, it just wrecks the card. So path tracing here is definitely a, you know, much more dramatic shift, but now you get into unplayable territory. So, you know, it makes the card look bad to show that, but I did just want to show that because the card was advertised as having some ray tracing support, and it does. You know, it's not nothing, and certain games have, you know, softer ray tracing, and you can still get some of that effect without as major performance hits. But for a game like this, in my opinion, you're better off playing it high with ray tracing off, more smooth frame rate. You can see we still get really like lovely lighting. Still looks great. So yeah, you know, super awesome game. Super happy with this too. That you know, $250 card is able to give us such a great, you know, experience. You can see here, you know, like even at these ray tracing, you know, with ray tracing off, we're still getting really cool lighting effects on the ground here. Great shadows, the taillights of the cars, you know, all look really, really cool. So definitely a really great experience. I would love to play the game on these settings. No complaints whatsoever. I think it looks great. All right, next up we have GTA 5 Enhanced. We're playing on the high preset, FSR set to quality. Now, for a game like this, it's important to know high is basically medium, because in GTA 5 it goes minimum, high, very high, maximum. So high is actually in the lower quadrant of those. But regardless, we're going to go on high here. And for this, we are actually going to turn on the ray tracing that is part of our new options here. So we're just going to go high for everything. High ray tracing, and see how it performs. So as far as this game goes, the ray tracing is not super intensive. As you can see, we're still holding a pretty solid FPS despite, you know, our hardware here. As we start to drive around here, you'll see totally smooth experience. Our 1% lows are still above 60, and yeah, of course, you know, this is a good game to show, not because it's intensive, but actually because it's not intensive. This is much like CS2. It is a new title technically, but it's based off, you know, an over 10-year-old title. So important to keep that in mind. But if you're looking, you know, for a card to play GTA 5 and you want to crank some of those ray tracing settings, which just kind of give you a little bit more of a boost when it comes to lighting. It's not transformative the way ray tracing in a game like Cyberpunk is, but it is certainly still, you know, nice to be able to turn those settings on. And we're quality upscaling. Looks great. Looks basically native. And yeah, of course, you know, in some settings like grass, I think is really intensive. In a game like this, you may dip a little bit, but with our average 109, that's a very comfortable place to be, and kind of, you know, we know we're kind of be at a playable frame rate regardless of the situation. So yeah, GTA 5 still, you know, today, very well optimized game. Major bummer the new GTA doesn't look like it's coming to PC at launch. Super upset about that, but you can play this one, all of the old ones, and you're gonna get, you know, real great experience. And even the older ones, the remasters, those have gone through, you know, different patch cycles, and those are all really playable and all play well on this hardware. So yeah, GTA 5 absolutely recommended for a graphics card like this, 100%. All right, next up we have Spider-Man 2. So Spider-Man 2, we're just going with a pretty basic preset here. We're just going with the medium preset. Now for our upscaling options, we do have quality and frame generation. Now, typically frame generation is not a setting that I try to go for, but I've tested this with and without frame generation, and frame generation does obviously give us that boost. And as far as like the actual feel of the game, in my opinion, it still feels like really fluid. It's not a game that really relies on, you know, super like precision aiming or anything like that, or really at all. So, you know, for a game like this, not something I necessarily mind having frame generation on for. As far as, you know, first-person shooters, a game like Cyberpunk or, you know, Call of Duty or things like that, or even like Marvel Rivals, I would definitely try to avoid it for a game like that. But for Spider-Man, definitely recommend it. So let's go ahead and start counting here. Obviously, we're here, combat area, lots of, you know, kind of visual effects going on. You can see we are in the 70 range. Feels really good. In my opinion, it still looks good with this upscaling. Let's see, there you go. And yeah, it feels good. It's a newer title, which is reassuring. You know, not necessarily a super well optimized title. You can see our VRAM target, or our used VRAM, is right up against our threshold here. We're still getting in the high 70s as we're swinging around here, sometimes going up into the 80s. If we stop, you know, and kind of like look at a particular area, you can see we climb into the 90s all the way up to 120. You can cap frame rate if you want a little bit smoother of an experience. That would help out with the 1% lows if we kind of cap it to, say, even like 100 to prevent us, you know, making those wild swings from up into the 130s. Like when we land like this, you know, you can see our frame rate will suddenly climb up, and you know that would help reduce that to a certain extent. But overall, not a lot of tweaking necessary here. Medium preset. You can even, you know, mess with some stuff, turn certain settings up to high. Probably not lose much performance, but yeah, definitely a very playable experience, and definitely a great game that, you know, looks great, especially on ultra wide. Definitely one of those games that, in my opinion, kind of shines in ultra wide, being able to see where you're swinging around the city, all that sort of stuff. So, yeah, great looking game, and really solid performance on a, you know, real value type GPU here. All right, to finish off, we're here in Fortnite. And for Fortnite, we're going to do, again, something real simple here. DirectX 12. We're using the medium preset with our Intel super sampling, super resolution set to quality. All right, so up in the bus here, this is typically the lowest FPS we'll see. Still at 130, so definitely solid and a competitive frame rate. Of course, a game like Fortnite, you know, you kind of want to balance between, you don't want the game to look terrible typically, but you don't want the visual quality that you do select to slow you down and not make you competitive. Because as soon as you die, you're out of the game. Nature of a battle royale. So, you know, settings like this, the game still looks great. Obviously, you know, the Intel super resolution, in my opinion, super impressive. You know, I think it's definitely way more mature than I thought it would be. So you can see, I don't want to spend a ton of time in this underground area. Go ahead and get out of here. All right, we're back out here. Let's go ahead and start counting again. So you can see 144 average, 45 average. Run around here. Definitely a playable frame rate. In my opinion, I would even consider this, you know, a competitive frame rate. 1% lows are really solid. No major stuttering. I know a lot of systems do have issues with Fortnite stuttering. We don't seem to be really experiencing any of those problems quite yet, which is certainly, you know, a good sign. So, you know, you can see, I'll have to get into a firefight here to see kind of where we go from there, but to begin with, definitely a pretty solid experience here. All right, running into a little more combat going on. Some effects going on. Let's see here. Still, we'll keep an eye on that frame rate. Still 140. Still in these higher, you know, higher realms here. So definitely a good experience as I get beat to death. But yeah, 152 average. Definitely a really solid experience. No question. You can definitely use this to play Fortnite and play it very well. All right, to wrap things up, you know, using the B580 at 1440p ultra wide, my opinion, totally capable graphics card. Now, out of the games we tested, Monster Hunter Wilds was definitely the one that gave it the most trouble. Games like that, you know, more unoptimized or more intensive games, you will have to kind of play with settings, do, you know, find what makes sense for you and your preferences. But typically, you know, games like that over time do get better optimized, so you can always wait on tiles like that. If you are in this 250 price bracket, there's really not a ton of options out there. When we look at the other cards here, RX 7600, that's only 8 gigabytes, then that's $270 if you can find it at retail, which actually that particular card is not that hard to find at retail. The 4060, the 4060 Ti, 7600 XT, you know, these cards are, you know, a little trickier to find at these price points. So at 250, if you can find this card, which in my experience is much easier to find at 250, I think you'll be in good shape. And if you're looking to build, say like a $600-700 build, I definitely would not have any hesitation advising someone to throw this in here. Now, that does require Intel keeping up with driver updates, which we all hope they do, and that does mean that you are also at this point in time hoping that the 5060 doesn't come out and like blow this thing out of the water to super affordable price point. Definitely a card that I'm interested in grabbing and checking out and putting through its paces at 1440p ultra wide. But what do you guys think? Is this a card that you would be okay with at 1440p ultra wide, or do you think this is typically marketed more 1080p, 1440p, 16 by 9? So is that more kind of where you'd place it, or do you think it's totally capable? My opinion, I think it's capable. I don't think you should be afraid of using it at ultra wide. And yeah, had a blast playing it. Absolutely amazing card, great value.